She came to observe, not to perform. Julia Hayes, a quiet composer with a hidden past, stepped into a room full of rising stars and ruthless judgment, only to be singled out by the most feared critic in classical music. Mocked, doubted, challenged. What they didn't know was that Julia once held a violin like it was part of her soul. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. The morning fog clung gently to the streets of San Francisco as Julia Hayes made her way toward the Westwood Music Academy. Dressed in a soft gray cardigan and sensible shoes, she blended easily into the crowd. Just another quiet face on a busy sidewalk. But inside, Julia carried something she hadn't dared reveal in years. In one hand, she held a worn leather notebook filled with orchestral scores, some bearing handwritten edits, others still waiting to be finished. It was her second skin. For over a decade, Julia had composed from the shadows, contributing anonymously to theater productions, scoring documentaries, writing string arrangements that others brought to life. Her name rarely appeared in programs. That suited her fine. She hadn't always been invisible. At 21, Julia had been called a prodigy. Her violin spoke with color and fire. Teachers predicted a career on the world's greatest stages. But what they hadn't seen was what happened behind the curtain, how her hands trembled before performances, how her vision blurred under stage lights, how each mistake felt like a personal unraveling. The breaking point came during a Juilliard audition. Her fingers froze mid-piece. The silence that followed had been more devastating than any harsh critique. She left New York the next day and never performed publicly again. She didn't give up music, just the part of herself that played it. Now 33, Julia had built a different kind of career, writing music instead of performing it. But still, something was missing. "You write like someone who's never held the instrument," her publisher had told her gently. "Your work is brilliant, but it lacks breath." So he arranged for her to observe a master class. "Watch how performers connect with their music," he'd said. "Learn from the greats." But he didn't know what it would cost her just to be near that world again. As she neared the entrance of Westwood Academy, her steps slowed. She could already hear the warm-up scales in the distance. Her breath caught, and her hand involuntarily flexed as if holding a bow. The past wasn't behind her. It had been waiting. Julia straightened her shoulders and walked through the doors. "Just observe," she told herself. "No one needs to know who you really are. But the music always remembers." The hall was nothing like Julia expected. She had imagined a sterile classroom with whiteboards and folding chairs. Instead, room 342 was Westwood's miniature jewel box, a concert hall in disguise. Tiered seating rose in quiet arcs around a polished wooden stage. The acoustics whispered of excellence. Every detail, from the velvet back seats to the stage's Steinway grand tucked neatly to one side, demanded reverence. She slipped into a seat in the back row, unnoticed. At least that was the plan. Below, nearly 60 students filled the front rows, each of them sharply dressed, instruments at the ready. Their cases were marked with conservatory stickers: Juilliard, Eastman, Curtis. Their posture told a story of training and ambition. These were the chosen ones. Julia, with her cardigan and visitor badge, was something else entirely. She opened her notebook quietly, its pages filled with the language of her solitude. Notations, phrasing arcs, harmony sketches. She told herself again, just observe. Nothing more. At precisely 10 a.m., the room shifted. Conversations died. All heads turned as a figure entered from the side door with the kind of presence that didn't need announcing. Constance Wellington. Tall and severe, with perfectly cut silver hair and an expression that might have intimidated royalty, she moved like someone who had spent her life expecting to be listened to and had rarely been disappointed. Her designer plaid blazer hugged her frame with crisp lines, and her gold-rimmed spectacles perched at the edge of her nose like punctuation. She surveyed the room like a general reviewing troops. "Good morning," she said, her voice clipped and clear. "I trust you've prepared something worthy of my time." Several students sat straighter, one visibly swallowed. "I don't believe in coddling talent," she continued. "The music world is not kind. Why should I be?" The question wasn't rhetorical. Julia felt her body tense, instinctively remembering the sting of criticism dressed as wisdom. Constance Wellington had once written a review so scathing it ended a young violinist's rising career. Her words could lift or ruin. Today, she intended to do both. I will call on a few of you to perform. I'll offer honest critique. If you can't handle that, there's the door. No one moved. No one dared. The first student, Alexis Chen, played a clean, elegant passage, technically flawless. Julia admired the precision. The response? Clean, precise, and utterly forgettable, Constance said without flinching. You play like you're afraid of the music. Alexis's smile wilted. Two more students followed, both reduced to paper-thin confidence by Constance's commentary. The room grew heavier with each critique. Julia scribbled notes, but her eyes flicked more often toward the exit. During a pause between performers, Constance's gaze swept the room. It traveled across the front rows, the middle section, and then, like a spotlight, it landed on Julia. You there, she said, pointing. In the gray cardigan. I don't recognize you. Julia's heart stopped. She tried to stay still, invisible. I'm just observing, she replied, voice barely above a whisper. Constance arched a brow. Everyone participates in my master classes. Come down here. Julia hesitated. All eyes turned to her. The distance between her seat and the stage felt like miles. I'm not a student, she said, firmer this time. I'm just here to observe. A ripple passed through the audience. A challenge to Constance Wellington? Unheard of. The critic's eyes narrowed. Young lady, I've been conducting master classes for 40 years. There are no passive observers, unless, of course, you feel you have nothing to contribute. A sting disguised as an invitation. Julia felt her face burn. Her notebook was still open in her lap, her name neatly printed in the corner. She could feel the smirks around her. Slowly she rose. Her knees felt unsteady as she descended the stairs, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. What's your name? Constance asked as Julia neared the stage. Julia Hayes. And what do you do, Miss Hayes? I'm a composer. Ah, a composer. The word rolled off her tongue like a curiosity. And do you play? I used to. Used to, Constance repeated, turning to the room with performative disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a composer who used to play. How quaint. She gestured toward a violin case on a nearby table. Perhaps you'd care to demonstrate your former abilities. Julia stood still. I don't perform anymore. Of course you don't, Constance replied, the smile not quite reaching her eyes. Yet you write for performers. She opened the case and removed a pristine violin, holding it out. Indulge us. Play something. Anything. Show us what informs your compositions. Julia didn't move. A student snickered from the front row. Maybe she can try Twinkle Twinkle, he whispered just loud enough. Constance pressed the violin closer to Julia. Consider this a learning opportunity. To write for an instrument, you must understand its soul. Julia's breath caught. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about music. This was a warning to outsiders. A ritual humiliation dressed in pedagogy. Her palms sweated. Her heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to walk away. But her hands, despite the years, remembered. She took the violin. It was heavier than she remembered. Or maybe she was just carrying more than weight. The room watched, some amused, others indifferent. Constance gestured toward the music stand. Whenever you're ready, a scale perhaps, or something simple. Julia didn't respond. She was still deciding. This wasn't about proving something to them. It was about proving something to herself. The violin trembled lightly in Julia's hands, not because the instrument was fragile, but because she was. Its polished surface reflected the stage lights in her own uneasy reflection. Her fingers hovered above the strings, aching with memory. She could still feel every eye on her. Constance Wellington sat with a pen poised, not to listen, but to dissect. The students leaned forward, some entertained, others expectant. This wasn't a stage. It was a crucible. Julia's throat tightened. It had been 8 years since she last performed publicly. 8 years since her Juilliard audition. She remembered the room, larger than this one, but colder. She remembered the silence that followed her faltering note, the way the judge cleared his throat and scribbled something without looking up. the way the echo of her failure clung to the walls even after she had walked away. After that day, she had locked her violin in a closet, not out of bitterness, but self-preservation. Every time she tried to play, her hands betrayed her, trembling, unreliable. The music that once freed her had become a source of pain. Composition had offered safety, structure, distance, a way to speak without standing in the spotlight. And yet, here she was. A simple choice lay before her. Decline with quiet dignity, return to her seat, and resume her role as invisible observer, or lift the bow and risk unraveling before them all. Her heart pounded so loudly it blurred the whispers. Her vision clouded at the edges, not from fear, but memory. She saw herself at 12, playing Tchaikovsky in her bedroom with a joy so fierce it had made her cry. She saw her teacher clapping after a flawless school recital. She heard her mother's voice. "Play like no one's watching, sweetheart." She missed that girl, and she realized something else. She hadn't truly lost her ability to play. She had lost permission to fail, to be vulnerable, to be seen as she was. Her grip on the violin tightened, not in defiance, but in reclamation. She took a deep breath and stepped forward to the center of the stage. "I won't be playing a scale," she said softly. "I'd like to play something I remember." A few chuckles flickered in the front row. Constance raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Julia raised the instrument to her shoulder. The feel was at once foreign and familiar. Muscle memory began to hum beneath the surface. She closed her eyes, blocked out the faces, listened only to the quiet hum of possibility. Then she drew the bow across the string. The note rang clear, low, rich, steady, a G, drawn from somewhere deeper than muscle. She followed it with another, then another. The opening of Bach's Chaconne from Partita No. 2. A piece so complex it was rarely attempted without months of preparation. A hush fell across the room. The music didn't just begin, it unfolded, measured in full, filled with something no audience could critique: truth. With every note, Julia peeled back the years, the silence, the fear, the part of herself she had buried beneath polite distance and self-doubt. This wasn't a performance. It was a return, a quiet reintroduction to the world, and to herself. She played not as the girl who froze, but as the woman who had found her way through fear and into mastery. Time slowed. She didn't see the rows of students or Constance's poised pen. She saw her past laid out like sheet music: mistakes, grief, hope, and something deeper still: grace. Her bow danced through double stops, her fingers gliding instinctively along the fingerboard. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was honest. Each phrase told a story she'd never spoken aloud. "I was broken. I stopped believing in myself. But I'm still here." When the final note hung in the air, like a breath held too long, Julia lowered her bow. She didn't need applause. She wasn't playing for them. She opened her eyes. No one moved. Not a single sound broke the moment. For the first time in years, Julia stood in silence that didn't feel like failure. It felt like recognition. She didn't smile. Not yet. She let the stillness settle around her like a long-lost friend. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breath evened. She had climbed out of the darkness, not with defiance but with grace, and she had brought the music with her. The first note had been steady, unexpectedly so. But what followed, what bloomed from Julia Hayes's fingertips, was something far beyond what anyone in that room had anticipated. Bach's Chaconne emerged not like a memorized piece, but like an ancient story long held within her bones. The audience, mid-breath, remained suspended in stillness, as though even the slightest movement might fracture the spell that had just begun to weave around them. Her bow glided with both tenderness and command. Every note was shaped not only by skill, but by something rarer: authenticity. Julia wasn't playing to impress. She was playing to remember. Each phrase peeled away another layer of silence, another year of self-doubt. The music came not from her hands alone, but from somewhere deep inside, the place where pain, beauty, and truth quietly coexist. The chaconne was not forgiving. It demanded dexterity, control, soul. Her fingers moved across the strings with surety that belied her 8 years away. Double stops, intricate arpeggios, cascading passages, all flowed with a grace not born of perfection, but lived experience. Somewhere in the fourth row, the concertmaster of the San Francisco Symphony leaned forward, his expression shifting from courteous curiosity to stunned reverence. He had performed this very piece last season, practicing it for months. But what he witnessed now was something else entirely, the rare collision of technical brilliance and emotional revelation. Constance Wellington sat motionless. Her notepad lay forgotten on her lap. The lines around her mouth had softened into something unreadable. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. Recognition, because this was not the meek composer she had tried to shame into silence. This was an artist. As Julia approached the piece's middle section, where the key turns from minor to major, the room itself seemed to exhale. A fragile radiance filled the space. The sorrow of the opening movements gave way to hope, like morning light breaking through after a long and haunted night. Several students shifted, visibly moved. One young woman wiped at her eyes. A professor sat stone still, his jaw slack. Julia, eyes closed, remained unaware of the shifting atmosphere. She was inside the music now, her entire being poured into the instrument, its curves, its strings, its voice. Her swaying posture, her bowed head, the arch of her wrist, every motion sang with quiet truth. She didn't chase volume or dazzle with showmanship. She let the soul of the piece speak through her. It wasn't about conquering the audience. It was about inviting them into her reclamation. Years of silence gave way to a river of melody. Her bow painted each measure like brushstrokes on a memory long buried and now fully revealed. And then came the return to minor. The shadows crept gently back into the music. But this time, they weren't frightening. They were familiar. The grief in those notes was tempered now by grace. What once paralyzed her now accompanied her. The fear was still there, but it no longer had control. Julia's dynamics whispered and roared. Her vibrato shimmered with depth. She didn't just play the chaconne, she lived it. She had walked the path of its emotional terrain, from sorrow to serenity, from collapse to clarity, and she brought every listener along with her. As she approached the final cadence, her bow slowed, as if reluctant to say goodbye. The last chord rang out with the resonance of something hard-earned, fragile and invincible all at once. It hung in the air, refusing to fade, as if the room itself held its breath. Then, silence. For 3 long heartbeats, no one moved. It was not the awkward silence of uncertainty. It was reverent, sacred. Then came a sound, a gasp, barely audible, from the back row. It broke the stillness like a single droplet striking still water. And with it, the room erupted. The first to rise was the concertmaster. He stood and applauded with both hands, his face open in awe. Others followed quickly, students, professors, staff, until the entire room surged to its feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. Some clapped with wide eyes. Others seemed unsure of how to react to what they had just witnessed. What Julia had done wasn't flashy. It wasn't theatrical. It was far more dangerous. She had been honest. She lowered the violin, breathless but still composed. Her hands, once paralyzed by fear, were steady now. Not because the anxiety had disappeared, but because it had found its place. No longer an enemy, but a shadow she'd learned to live beside. Julia scanned the room. Some faces were filled with astonishment, others with admiration, but none held the mockery she had first seen, not even Constance's. The critic remained seated, her face unreadable. But her eyes, those sharp, dissecting eyes, were soft now. And as Julia's gaze met hers, Constance offered the smallest of nods. It wasn't an apology, but it was something just as rare, respect. And that, Julia realized, was more than enough. Because in this moment, she hadn't just played a piece of music, she had reclaimed her voice. Not with defiance, not with bitterness, but with beauty. The applause finally softened, but its echoes lingered, like ripples across a once still pond. Julia stood motionless for a moment longer, violin at her side, not savoring the attention, but taking in the stillness that followed her music. It was the kind of silence filled with understanding, the kind she had feared for years but now embraced. As the crowd slowly settled, something unexpected happened. The concertmaster of the San Francisco Symphony made his way to her, extending his hand with a look of unfiltered admiration. "That was extraordinary," he said. "Are you currently playing with any ensemble?" Before Julia could respond, others began to gather. A professor offered her a guest lecturing position. A young student asked if she could study with her. Someone mentioned a chamber group looking for a new lead. Opportunities rushed in, not out of sympathy, but recognition. Through the movement, she caught Constance Wellington's figure still seated, unusually still. Their eyes met again. This time Constance rose and approached. "You handle the violin," she said, her voice more measured now, as if it never left your hands. Julia smiled gently. "It never truly did." There was a pause. Two women, both shaped by music and time, standing in the quiet aftermath of transformation. "Why did you stop?" Constance asked softly. Julia met her gaze. "Fear and failure. I froze at Juilliard. I thought it meant I wasn't meant for the stage. And yet," Constance said almost to herself, "here you are." She handed Julia a card. "The chamber orchestra is seeking a composer in residence. The role includes performance. I believe you'd be an asset to both worlds." Julia accepted it with fingers no longer trembling from anxiety, but from possibility. 3 months later, the lights dimmed inside San Francisco's Herbst Theater. Julia stood center stage, violin in hand, the chamber orchestra behind her. The program read Emergence, her own composition, written in the weeks following the masterclass. A piece born of silence, shame, rediscovery. In the front row sat Constance Wellington, no notepad, just still hands resting on her lap. Their eyes met again. This time, not challenger and critic, but two women who understood what it meant to fall and rise again. Julia raised her bow. She no longer played to prove anything. She played because the music had always been her voice, and now finally the world was listening. For those who wonder if it's too late, sometimes the second beginning is the one that truly matters. Some stories speak to the heart so deeply, they echo long after the final note has faded. Julia's journey is one of those emotional stories, not just about talent, but about truth. Not just about music, but about memory, courage, and healing. In a world that too often applauds perfection and silences vulnerability, her voice reminds us of the quiet strength found in simply showing up, as you are. This isn't just a narrated story, it's a mirror. For anyone who has ever put down a dream, doubted their worth, or been made to feel small in a room full of judgment, Julia's moment of emergence is your call to rise. These are the justice stories that matter, not courtroom dramas, but real human moments when dignity is reclaimed and authenticity wins over appearance. Sometimes we don't need another beginning. We just need permission to continue. And if you've ever felt like you missed your moment, remember, unraveled fates can be rewoven. The thread was never broken, only waiting for you to pick it up again. We share these heartwarming stories because they remind us what matters most isn't applause. It's the courage to be seen. If this story touched you, don't let it end here. Share it, start a conversation, tell someone else it's not too late to return to what they love. Because your second act may just be the one the world needs most.